And we are now live.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our second meeting for the short-term rentals. See everybody back again. And welcome to the public that's sitting here listening and to the stuff. So I'd like to call the meeting to order here now. It's now 7:05. And before we start the meeting, we have a territorial land acknowledgement. So before our meeting gets underway, I would like to formally recognize the territorial keepers of this land, specifically the neighbors of the Alderville First Nation, with the formal territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the township of Alma-Colman is located on the Mississauga Anishinaabe territory and the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. The township of Alma-Colman successfully acknowledges that the Mississauga Nation are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in the perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility and ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Okay, so just a little bit of house cleaning tonight before we start. So our first meeting was a very good meeting, and everybody had lots to talk about and lots to get out to, lots to say. So, you know, some things that we want to do here tonight is to try to keep things moving along on a good direction and on a timely fashion, because we need to put this bylaw together. The short-term rental is already going. We've already had some complaints, so we're already dealing with that. We've sent out 51 packages, and we right now have no one signed in. And we understand some of that, but even though this bylaw is still in effect, we're dealing with the complaints with this bylaw. And so you can be assured that that's happening. The other thing that we would like to do also is because we have such a big group here, if everybody talks for 3 or 4 minutes, that's going to take a half an hour for one issue. So I'm proposing that we put a time limit on our discussions, let's say 3 minutes, so that we can get it out there and we can have a certain amount of say, and I'll try to do my best to make sure that the same person can get to talk every time. But if we don't do something, we're never going to get through this. And we really need to get this bylaw done and get it out to our short-term rental owners. And so they know where they sit. So, in saying that, so I would like an approval of the agenda, and I also have an addition to the agenda that's not on there, that should be. And what it is the amendment to the agenda under item 5 to include the review of the existing bylaw license number 89/2022, which encompasses the checklist that's noted under item 5. So, can I have a motion to adopt it? Amendment, Steve, seconded by Alicia.
I'm sorry, which Steve? We have 2 now.
Steve, go.
Okay. Steve 1, Steve 2.
And Alicia. And Alicia second.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, carry.
Sorry, excuse me. I did have my hand up, Mr. Chair. Valerie MacDonald speaking.
Yes,
I had asked that a report that, or not a report, but a comparison that I provided earlier, I guess it was last evening, be added to the agenda. However, based on our desire to move forward as quickly as possible, I understand there are copies of it, and I would ask that this matter be put on next week's or the next meeting's agenda, but that all members of the committee receive copies, and I understand those copies have been made.
thank you, Valerie. And I think Yolanda is looking after that. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have made copies and they will be distributed at the end of the meeting as they were not added to the agenda. And they may be added to the next agenda at the next meeting.
And one question, Mr. Chair, when do I make that request then that it be added to the next agenda?
I believe you have. Okay,
Sorry, I couldn't hear your answer.
I believe you've already made that request, but Yolanda's gonna look after that for you.
Is your
Okay.
microphone on?
Thank you.
Is that better? Turn down. Okay. Okay, sorry, Nicole.
I'd like to make a motion to see if we can review Daryl's complaint report prior to going through the checklist. On the agenda, it is after the checklist that we're going to be going through. I wonder if we can go through it before.
It might be a good idea as Daryl has to leave a little early.
There you go.
So, if you want to make a motion to do that,
I'll accept that friendly amendment. So please don't
okay,
include that as the amendment.
okay. All in favor of that? Okay, all right. Alicia?
So I just had one other motion that I wanted to put forward, which in the last meeting, we never actually got to review the actual bylaw. I'm sorry, the zoning bylaw, which it was on the agenda, but we never got to, and it's not actually showing for review on this agenda, which I also think is important to have added to the agenda.
Yes.
It's showing as information and reference, but it's not actually showing for a review under the policy items.
Yes, and I believe we're going to look at that. Go ahead, Yolanda.
Sorry, I just wanted to note that we currently have a motion on the floor and we should be reviewing that motion and debating on that before we accept any other motions.
Okay, you're right. So we need a seconder to Nicole's motion. So Nicole had a motion on the floor to review Daryl's report. Mr. Gilchrist?
Yes. I think so.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, pass. Carried. Alicia,
I'd like to put forward the motion to add the zoning bylaw to the policy review items on the agenda as well.
okay,
Like I said, we're currently dealing with one motion. We'll have to deal with that first before we accept another motion.
okay. So that first motion, Yolanda, got carried?
It did, so we can debate it now. So whoever made that motion has the opportunity to take the floor first to speak on that motion.
Okay. Nicole, do you have anything to say?
The reason why we'd like to review that before we go through the checklist. By reviewing this first, it just gets us to know the nature of these complaints. And that will help us determine the appropriate changes that we need to make to the checklist.
Okay,
It just will help us move forward if we know what the complaints were.
all right. Anybody else? Okay. So do we want to review that like right now?
The motion is currently on the floor to review it. So yes, now is
Okay.
the time to debate that or
Yeah.
have a discussion about that. And I just wanted to just reiterate to everybody to please turn your microphones on so you don't forget that when you do speak, we do need to hear you through those microphones. Thank you.
Okay, so Daryl? If you want to go,
Questions, like, I mean, I could certainly, through you, your chair. This was a bylaw report that was asked by council to supply him with the number of complaints we had relating to all our bylaws in 2022. As you can see, the council asked for a breakdown on it, and that's what I submitted in January, the breakdown. There was 87 total bylaw complaints that we were dealing with. 27 of them were done with short-term rentals. 15 of them were noise complaints, 21 were property standards complaints, 9 were constructions without permits. Complaints, fill permits were 2, and zoning bylaw was 7. Drainage and environmental, for site plan control, there was 3 complaints for it, and encroachment, there was 2, and 1 animal control issue. So I'm not sure what other information you would like. I can hopefully try and answer it.
Okay, so are you able to determine how many of these complaints were received from owner occupied versus owner not occupied of the 27 STR complaints?
I don't think I could at this time. If you look, I did not put that location, was not asked for that in my report to council, so I could go through it, but
Can I carry on? I have a few more questions.
Yep.
How many of these complaints were received lakeshore versus non-lake shore?
again, I did do a breakdown that 10 of the STR complaints were received in one location, 12 received in another location. 2 in one location, 2 in another location, 1 in another location. We have that on our software system on where those locations are. I was not asked that to provide to council at the time, so it's not in this report.
Could we have this information for next meeting? Because it does make a difference.
I would have to see if in a bylaw report, usually if we put locations and stuff in bylaw reports, we need to go through freedom of information or we're in closed session for those.
Mhm.
So I would have to do some research to see if we can provide you with that first.
And one more.
Yep.
So some of them, there's a comment in your report saying that some of these complaints are duplicates.
Okay.
Do you know how many of those are duplicates? Does that come into the 27? Does that lower the number of complaints against STRs if they're duplicates?
I think it says 10 complaints received for one location. 12 complaints received for one location, 2 complaints. So when I'm saying duplicates, that's what I mean. They're duplicate locations.
Okay, so they're
Oh.
not this, okay, the same.
Not the same, they would be the same kind of complaint,
Yeah.
you know, dealing with noise or dealing with
And do we know? if they're the-
no licensing or whatever, but that's what I mean by duplicate
Okay.
complaints.
Made by the same person or,
I don't know if they're all made by the same person. Again, I can't really reveal some information on the complainant on bylaws, but it was for the same location.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Colleen?
Do you have any information as to how many further complaints have been made, if any, since the time that you compiled that report?
I don't have any information in front of me. I would have to go back on the software system to see how many were made
So-
since this report.
And what's the date of the report?
This was January 19th, 2023. This is dealing with last year's files.
Mr.
Um,
Chair.
Valerie, do you have
Yeah.
your hand up or was it left up?
No,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
a new. I just wanted to say that I can tell you that some people quit putting in complaints because they didn't feel that there was any action. And I say that because I know I am one of those people who continued to keep records but not put in official complaints because of not seeing any action. And the illegal operations have continued to this very past weekend. And I quit putting in complaints last fall. I have not done so anytime since, and others would be in the same position as myself, especially speaking to our road 6108 Curtis Point Road. I just wanted to put that on the record so people realized that although these may be 27 complaints up to the end of January, that people have continued to have complaints, but felt that it was not getting any action. And so their efforts, they quit doing it.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I worked with residents over the past year regarding this issue and have been in contact with them via email. And I spoke with one today and received an email from her. And she did submit complaints to the township on March 3rd. regarding the lack of the enforcement of the licensing bylaw because there are now advertisements through Airbnb for the STRs that are in the township. So they are not licensed. So at this point in time, that is something that really needs to be looked at because if there is mechanism, as Jennifer referred to in last week's meeting, that we can approach Airbnb to have them withdraw those advertisements until they become licensed. That's a step that obviously needs to be taken because there's no possibility of licensing and bylaw enforcement at the rate we're going. And regardless of how many complaints there are and the nature of the complaints, if you've got one of those bucolic, lovely little Airbnbs that's in the middle of nowhere, that's fine. But this isn't the issue that we're facing here. The residents have been bombarded with heated confrontation from 3 men from the STR who wanted to access the backyard to use the lake. A woman from the STR sitting in private lawn furniture. Rob Gourde taking pictures. Rob Gourde did respond. Another one, noise, fireworks, excess cars parked on the street, group people from STR walking streets at night, shining flashlights into other properties. Large tour bus dropped off a group of people at the STR exceeding the occupancy limits and the bus could not turn around. It had to reverse down the street, creating hazard for residents. Carrying on through the summer, this goes from June 11th right through to September 18th. Excessive noise, yelling, and a group of 6 men repeatedly trying to use backyard to play ball and waiting for these people to leave their home. Labor Day weekend, large party with more than 20 people, 7 cars, noise, music, yelling all weekend, people walking the streets late at night drinking. The Labor Day weekend, male guests of the STR were urinating against the side of the STR in full view of porch and front yard and roadway, presumably because the STR ran out of water. 14 people renting a 5-bedroom STR, which only allows for 10. Why is the bylaw not being enforced? So there's details. This is a very uninformative report regarding the bylaw infractions. And these have been continuing for over a year. So this to me is not this whole issue. And I'm not on either side of not having STRs or having STRs. You can laugh all you want, Mr. Corcoran, but that is true. I'm on the side of residents being protected as well. So to me, this is not an issue of pro STR groups versus anti-STR groups. This is strictly all about getting the licensing done and enforcing the bylaw. And that's not something that either of these groups can do unless we get a consensus going.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one more, Colleen.
I was just going to add that right now, the township has a bylaw, and the bylaw requires that all STRs be licensed to either operate or to advertise. I just did a quick search, and in Grafton area, there are 340 STRs advertised on Airbnb. None of them are licensed. All of them are therefore in contravention of the bylaw. So I think we have a real problem here. Township, and as taxpayers, we should be concerned about the fact that we've got a bylaw that is not being enforced. And there's going to be liability because of that to the township, and therefore our taxes are going to go up. So I think that we need to look at the fact that this bylaw needs to be enforced. 340 places are being advertised and presumably being operated. I understand that a comment was made at the last meeting that there's a mechanism for the township to contact, and Grit mentioned this as well, Airbnb and Verbo, and advise them that the township requires licensing, and until the licensing is in place and is put down on the advertisement, that those STRs should be removed from the site. And I think that the township would be well advised to look into doing that. And if they did that, that would probably encourage the STR owners to get information and apply for licensing, and that would assist in the enforcement. It's a real issue, and I think that the township and the town council needs to be concerned about the liability issue that they're going to be exposed to if they don't enforce this bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so listen, I want to keep things moving along here, and we need to deal with the bylaw, and we need to start working on the bylaw. I understand that we got some complaints and duly noted, and I'm sure it's all taken down. So let us come back to you with some answers to some of that stuff at the next meeting. And for the purpose of tonight, let's move along. I don't want to get into a crossfire here with each other. So let's try to focus on getting to the brass taxes and into the bylaw here. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Alrighty. Okay, so
Mr. Chair.
yes,
Brighton has a paragraph that I think could help us very much with, in their bylaw, with what we are dealing with right now on this topic. And it reads, short-term accommodations legally existing on the date of the passage of this bylaw shall have until, and they set a date, to obtain a license, after which a license will be granted under full regard and effect to this bylaw, as though the lot was never used as a short-term accommodation rental. And I think that that could be something added to our bylaw, put out in a press release, put out in letters, that gives them a deadline and a penalty, which is they would lose their grandfathering, if we'll call it that, as of a certain date. So that is at the end of the report that you people will have a copy of later on at the end of the evening. But I think it's one of the things we could put in place that would help our staff deal with the existing bylaw that we have or any changes that we make to it. That's my comment.
thank you, Valerie. So if we can move along here and get to number 5, because number 5 is where we start getting into our own bylaw. And these like the things that Valerie just brought up is something where it might fit in as we get going along, changing paragraphs that we might need. So if everybody can just kind of,
Chair, just point of order. Did we vote on approval of the minutes? No.
no, because we had a motion to do that.
I didn't want to make a big deal about it, but
Yeah.
technically speaking, it should have been slotted in as an agenda item. And
Yeah.
we resumed the agenda.
Okay, so I will move on with to approval of the agenda here now.
No, we did the agenda. We did the minutes.
Or sorry, but okay. So item 4, approval of the minutes. Okay, so the minutes as of March 1st, 2023, short-term rental and the ad hoc committee meeting. Be it resolved that the minutes of the March 1st, 2023 short-term rental ad hoc committee meeting be approved. Do I have? You, Joan, 1, Steve. Okay. Do we have a discussion, anything? No discussion on the minutes? Okay, okay, so all in favor? Carried. Okay, so number 5,
Mr. Chair, sorry.
sorry.
So we have not, we've not done the approval of the agenda yet, is
We-
that correct?
We did.
Because I had a motion to, before the agenda was approved, to include the zoning bylaw.
We can
How
do
does
that.
work? Sorry,
The
I'm
only-
a little bit ignorant to that because I'm not
Yep.
sure, but that will come later. Is that?
So we're never going to get to it because we got so much to do tonight in such a short time. Can we put it on the agenda for next meeting? Would that be okay?
Well, I guess I think it's important it's difficult to go through this list. The list of for the licensing requirements, if there isn't priority in some of the other items. Reviewing the zoning bylaw may be important to discuss where SDRs are actually allowed in the municipality before we start going through the checklist, because if they're not allowed in certain areas, that could be an issue for the checklist, I guess is why I'm asking that.
So when we adopted the amendments, so we are going to start going through the bylaw first. The minute that checklist will be in the bylaw at the end of it, and we'll pick it up then.
But the zoning bylaw isn't in there.
And the zoning bylaw, if we can bring it next meeting.
The zoning bylaw is a whole other bylaw to review. And that is not, I don't believe, the mandate of this committee. I think this committee is just mandated to go over the licensing bylaw. I may be wrong. I haven't, it might be in the terms of reference. Jennifer, do you have a comment on that?
I'd like to say that there's two different pieces to this whole puzzle. There's the zoning bylaw, which tells you where you can have short-term rental accommodations. And then there's the licensing bylaw. The licensing bylaw is passed under the Municipal Act, the zoning bylaw amendments passed under the Planning Act. It doesn't matter. I don't want to say it doesn't matter. That's not correct. But if a short-term rental is not permitted in the zoning bylaw, it doesn't matter what the licensing bylaw says. Because you have to be able, in order to have the land use, it has to be permitted in the zoning bylaw. So you really can't have this discussion without considering zoning and where short-term rental accommodations are permitted. I wasn't involved in the terms of reference for this committee, so I wasn't involved in that. But as far as what this committee, it's my understanding that this committee is looking at where short-term rental accommodations should be permitted and the licensing of those. So I think that zoning has to be a discussion taken in this forum.
Mhm.
And it is important. With respect to the license application checklist and that sort of thing, I think to a certain degree, you can have that discussion absent of where the short-term rental accommodations are permitted, because you're going to be looking at the same kind of things, whether you have parking, where your garbage is going to be, all that kind of stuff. So, and your insurance and all that. So that's a discussion, and it's on the agenda, so it's worthwhile having. But one of the fundamental questions for short-term rental accommodations in our municipality will be, where are they permitted? Because right now, under the zoning bylaw, they're not permitted in most zones. Except for the short-term rental accommodations that were in existence on March 19th, 2022. And those were the ones that have legal non-compliant status. And those are the ones that the packages were sent out to. So no new short-term rental accommodations are basically permitted in the township, absent a zoning bylaw amendment that would specify where they are permitted.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer.
So that's why
Alicia?
it's very important. That's why I'm pushing
Yeah.
for it to be added, because currently for myself, and I would not be able to proceed with a short-term rental on my property at this point because I did not have one before the license was created. So at this point, I would not be permitted to have a short-term rental on my property at any point based on this bylaw and the zoning bylaw.
Okay. So it looks like
Or anybody else for that matter.
so it looks like we will have to add it to the next agenda, because we're not prepared and no one, it hasn't been handed out.
We can. So if a motion does want to be made, you can fill out a form called a notice of motion. You've actually verbally stated that you want to notice a motion on the next meeting. So that is verbally, orally put on these meeting minutes. I'll send you the form, Alyssa.
Okay.
Just complete that form and it'll be placed on the next agenda and it'll be brought forward for debate at that time.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so item 5, the policy review items. So review of the short-term rental accommodations, license application checklist, plus the addition would be the bylaw. And I'm presenting that we start with the bylaw, that we go through it paragraph by paragraph. And then we'll, like I say, if we can keep everything, keep the discussion to 3 minutes, because you can see that we have lots to look at. And it looks like, even the first page, all the and whereas is probably not an issue until we maybe get to the definitions on the second page. Okay.
Mr. Chair, is it possible to put that up on a screen so that we can see exactly what it is that we're talking about? For instance, at this point, not expecting we were going through the bylaw, I can't quickly pull it up on my screen without going back to the first agenda, the first meeting's agenda, etc. So if we could have it in front of us, so we knew exactly, we were all on the same page, so to speak, is that possible?
So Valerie, everybody here has a copy of the agenda and paper.
I have an electronic version. I'll just have to keep looking for it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so 1.1 is agent. Agent means a person fully appointed by an owner, applicant, or the township as the context dictates to act on their behalf. Anybody have an issue with that one?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I wonder if within each section, for example, in definitions, if you might just invite any comments, if folks want to highlight a specific section, just in deference to your appeal to make this move as expeditiously as possible.
Yeah, it would be a good idea, but has everybody read the bylaw? That would be my only concern. We might miss something. Yeah. So we probably need to go through it paragraph by paragraph. I know it's going to take longer, but you know, there's Joan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I kind of concur with what Mr. Gilchrist has said. We've all looked at it. I mean, if you want to go through the first page, page by page, that might expedite things, but we might not get home tonight if we go paragraph by paragraph.
Is everybody
That's,
comfortable if we just say, does anybody have an issue with number 1?
First page.
Yes. Page 2. Does anybody have any issues with page 2? Joan?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if principal residence is something that could be open for discussion. Oh, so I'll go back to the.
That would be Joan on page 3.
Maybe I don't get to say
Okay.
anything yet, do I?
Are we okay with page 2? Okay, so page 3, Joan has brought up principal residence. So I will read it. Okay. So principal residence means the residential unit that is owned by the renter by the natural person, alone or with others, where the natural person ordinarily resides and makes their home and conducts their daily affairs, including, without limiting, paying bills, receiving documentation related to identification, taxation, insurance, proposed driver's license, income tax returns, medical plan documentation, vehicle registration, and voter registration, or similar information. And B, where the natural person has no other property designated as such within the township of Almont-Colleman or any other jurisdiction. Okay, so I see some problems with that myself. So Joan, do you want to
Well, I'm
start
just
us off?
wondering, I'm just wondering if this is a prelude to with the SDRs that it just kind of popped up here, and that would be where the SDRs would be located. And people would be expected to be in those houses and not rent out the full house.
Yep. Okay,
So that.
Any comments?
I just put it out there for that.
yeah. Any comments on Jones?
So do you mean
Nicole?
owner occupied?
Mhm.
Is that what we're calling
Yes.
it? As opposed to owner non-occupied?
Right.
Those are, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Nicole or Yolanda, can you read back what Joan was talking about there just for for clarity?
So she was indicating that it's basically the definition is a prelude as to where the principal residence is and whether or not, whether or not you can rent out your full house, right? Because if it's owner occupied, the owner is obviously residing there. I think that's the gist of it.
Chair.
So, yes, go ahead.
Might I suggest, I don't, I get Joan's point. I don't see a problem with the definition of what a principal residence is. Might I suggest we need to add another definition of owner occupied principal resident, and then the verbiage can say, connect the dots that we make a distinction between an STR where the owner is continuing to occupy some portion of the principal resident, as opposed to one where the whole home is rented in. So, or add two definitions, an owner occupied and a non-owner occupied principal residence. But I think you still need to define what a principal residence is. That's just keeping us consistent with zoning bylaws.
Yep.
And other places will find that definition.
Because does this say to me that the owner has to live on the property or in the unit? Right? Great.
This is just definition, so it is describing what a principal residence is. And I concur with what's been said, that perhaps there needs to be the owner operated, but not living and not being a principal residence. It's a secondary property. But it really doesn't matter regarding that, because if in Jennifer Current's reports, she explained how the $750 fee was arrived at, and that the solicitors, the municipal solicitors report said that you can't distinguish and put punitive costs on someone just because they're not living at the property. If it's a short-term rental, the license should be applying regardless of whether it's owner occupied or not owner occupied.
Okay.
Please correct me if that's not correct.
So, Steve, Yolanda, did you take what Steve was saying? Are we going to add another one? You want to?
I think it really depends on how it is within the context of the bylaw. The definitions themselves are there, and pretty much the definitions are probably not going to change based on what we've got here. However, once you get into the meat of that bylaw, that's when you're going to see these terms pop up and how they're used in that context. So I think that's the point where you may want to go back to the definitions and redefine certain things or add further definitions.
Okay. So keep that thought, Steve. Okay, so anything else on page 3?
Mr. Chair. It's
Yes,
Nancy
Valerie?
Crosby here.
Nancy?
I raised my hand at page 2 and I guess you didn't see me. I wanted to discuss the dwelling unit description where tents, trailers, and mobile homes or room or suite or rooms in a boarding or rooming house, hotel or motorhome are excluded in this, where we discussed last week about nature retreats and different experiences available in the township, where there's many. And I'm hoping that we can expand nature retreats of some sort as to what options are available.
Okay.
I'd like to know why they were excluded, actually, and like, is there a bylaw that you can't put a different type of structure, even if it's a tree house on your property, and why that couldn't be something that could be an experience for somebody to, be involved in a short-term rental?
Jennifer, could you answer that one?
With respect to the definition of dwelling unit, the dwelling unit definition is a pretty standard definition used in most zoning bylaws throughout Ontario. A dwelling unit meaning a group of rooms or that provide sleeping, eating, and sanitary services, and that can be lived in as an independent housekeeping unit. At no time during the previous discussions on short-term rentals were alternative accommodation choices mentioned or raised as an issue. It becomes a difference then, are we talking, because it's short-term rental accommodation is typically associated with a dwelling unit. When we get into the other more, what are we calling them? Nature
Unique.
reserve, nature retreats and those types of things. There then becomes a difference between camping and short-term rental accommodations. And then if you're going to start operating a campground or camp facility, that gets into different zoning issues and repercussions. When you start operating a campground, you're having to look at things like communal servicing facilities, that sort of thing. It just brings in a different bent to the conversation. And that was never taken into consideration during the previous discussions. Whether we're going to be getting into, I think it will expand the scope of this committee greatly if you're going to add to the mandate to look at unlicensed campgrounds as part of the mandate.
Is there
Okay.
a bylaw? Is there a bylaw that exists that you can't have a tent or a yurt or a shepherd's trailer or that sort of thing, that's a unique experience to not have that on your property and have people stay in that?
The township zoning bylaw contains the uses that are permitted on properties, and camping is permitted in campgrounds, in generally the recreation commercial zone.
But there's also something in this bylaw that says you can't put up a tent on short-term rentals, that kind of stuff.
Yes,
So I
yes,
think
that part came about because what happened was people would rent a cottage, for instance.
Yep.
Say the cottage has 3 bedrooms. They had 10 people sleeping in it. And then they would invite their friends and their friends would pitch tents in it. So a cottage that was originally designed for 6 people suddenly may have 10, 12, 14, 16 people stay on the property. And that's where the tent issue came in with respect to short-term rental accommodations.
Okay, thank you. Now, I was surprised when we went by this one, because I think we have 1 or 2 nature retreats out there that probably should be discussed as far as,
If you're referring to Whispering Springs.
no,
Okay.
I think we have a couple nature short-term rentals, nature retreats. No?
They weren't involved in this discussion. Like Whispering Springs is entirely a separate entity. It is designated
Yes.
under the official plan and zoned under the township zoning bylaw. So it's a completely different entity than these short-term rentals.
Okay, Nicole?
I run a short-term rental, and on my property, I have a shepherd's hut. It is on my property. We are there. We live there. We are always there. We never have anybody stay when we're not present. 2 people are allowed to spend the night in our shepherd's hut. It's lovely. It's a great experience. We've had wonderful people come and stay from all over the world. I don't see how this poses a problem to the township, or maybe we should amend or have, yes, no extra tents, no pitching of tents, as opposed to if people have a yurt that is there all the time, or a shepherd's hut, or a trailer, a vintage trailer. There's some really cool vintage trailers out there. Why is that prohibited?
Jamie?
would those not fall under this bylaw? So if you had a trailer or your yurt that you may be renting out, would you not apply for the short-term rental licensing for the yurt that you're renting out?
Or.
Okay, yes,
This
go ahead.
time, our zoning bylaw actually prohibits trailers and tents and stuff being for human habitation. So it is in the zoning bylaw, trailers are meant to be used in resorts and stuff, so. It is, part of our zoning bylaw that prohibits them for human habitation.
So where does Nicole's, what's the name of it, Nicole?
The Shepherd's Hideaway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so what's the legal on that one?
I wouldn't have a definition for that right here in front of me,
Okay,
Chair, right now.
Can we amend that bylaw?
Zoning bylaw,
Yes.
that would be up
That
to
would-
council to amend it.
yeah. Colleen?
I think before we start talking about amending to allow certain SDRs, I think we have to figure out whether we can even get a handle on the existing SDRs and get them licensed. Because it seems to me that if to date, the township has not been able to license or get any of these SDR licensed, that this is just adding an extra layer, and I don't foresee that they're ever going to be able to get anything licensed if we keep adding more amendments to the bylaw that makes it easier to operate short-term rentals. Because right now, everybody who is advertising or operating SDR in this township is in contravention of the bylaw, and nothing's being done about that. And the bylaw's been in
Okay.
effect for 10 months.
One sec. Great. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, so we currently have a prospector tent on our property, and it's a beautiful spot. Actually, Daryl came to see it, and it has 5-star ratings. People have come from all over the world. It's a seasonal property, and I would love to fill out the application, but we currently don't fall under what the dwelling unit description is. And I don't personally find it it's not a camping site, it's just a beautiful piece of property that's very private. The same with the Shepherd's hut and different unique experiences. It's not like I'm putting up 10 prospector tents. I'm keeping it as one so that, people can have a very private experience, and we're not bothering anybody. So when you say that we're holding up by trying to expand what the description is, I can't put in my application as a property owner to pay for my permit, because we don't fit into the category.
Okay. Great.
So for the purposes of what we're doing right now, through you, Mr. Chair, to our planner, sounds to me like these really aren't STRs per se. If they're advertising through Airbnb, are they really classified as an Airbnb? I don't know what those requirements are. So should we even be considering them? Because for all intents and purposes, in the case of this, an STR is an actual house or building that has amenities in it that we need to house people. So these may just be something else that needs to be dealt with at a different time, as opposed to with the STR bylaw. I don't know the answer to that.
So great. I actually agree with you that this is something separate, that there isn't there are many unique experiences. We don't fit into this category. Maybe that's another step. I'm the first person that would have that application in. And as I introduced myself last week, I'm also very concerned about all of the short-term rentals and people creating and excavating extra parking spots on my property for space at all of the cottages. And it's a huge safety concern for me. So that's my comment.
Mr. Chair, just
Yep,
to
thanks.
follow up on that, Mr. Chair, because I attended the strategic plan meeting here yesterday morning, and that is going to be addressed through the strategic plan. So trying to push it through right now probably isn't a good idea. I'm not sure, But it sounds like there's the potential for an economic development and agricultural committee that will look at these kinds of things, tourism and various things for the township going forward, but maybe that isn't applicable right now.
Mhm.
We obviously need to discuss or decide on that.
I would ask, maybe our staff with Daryl and Jennifer, if they can maybe bring us back the legal part of that and whether, if we can do any of that with this bylaw. Is that possible?
What, can you, just explain a little further? on
Can-
what you're-
So with these yurts and with what
what the
Nicole has,
definitions of those are?
the definitions of those are, and can they be part of this bylaw or do they have to be something else?
We can look into that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry, what I am going to say, however, is I'm not sure when this committee is meeting again. But I will be away on Friday, Monday and Tuesday. So
Okay,
what I can get done, I will try to get done. But I do have a vacation planned and I will be out of the office for 3 days between now and next week.
okay, thank you. One more, Valerie?
Thank you. I'd just like to say that Grit's view of this is one that I share. I don't think that this is our ad hoc committee's mandate. I think that there are lots of other unique experiences beyond what we could even talk about right now that will go into the future, and that it should be looked at separately from the STRs.
Okay, thanks, Valerie.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yep.
Through you to Jennifer. Is the definition of dwelling unit that we find in here consistent with, for example, the zoning bylaw? Would there be a similar definition in one of the relevant zones?
Yeah, the definition for a dwelling unit in the township zoning bylaw, I can tell you what it is right now. Dwelling unit means a suite operated as a housekeeping unit used or intended to be used as a domicile by one or more persons and usually containing cooking, eating, living, sleeping, and sanitary facilities. The word suite in this definition means a single room or series of rooms of complementary use and operated under a single tenancy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, just in response to that, from what we're hearing, it would seem there are certain uses which may fall outside existing zoning right now. But as Grit has mentioned, the council is already looking at this from a different perspective. Is there any benefit in adding something in this definition that would say consistent with the zoning bylaw, which may be amended from time to time? In other words, rather than our worrying about whether tent or trailer should be here right now, should we simply recognize that the zoning bylaw would take precedence? And if it were ever changed to include tents or trailers, there'd be no reason to come back and revisit this. It would automatically be changed.
Qualified perhaps, because this is, the licensing bylaw is a bylaw passed under the Municipal Act and the zoning bylaws passed under the Planning Act. So we're dealing with two different pieces of legislation. It would probably be best that you wanted consistent definitions, just to use the definitions the same in each bylaw. I think what I'm hearing is perhaps the group is considering or wants to consider a separate definition for whether it be a short-term rental accommodation or a separate use entirely that would be considered a rural wilderness experience of some sort.
Farm experiential or.
Okay.
wilderness.
Limited to.
And that gets into a whole separate thing, because depending on your zoning, whether you're in the rural zone or the agricultural zone, on-farm diversified uses are permitted. And such a use as that could probably be interpreted to be an on-farm diversified use, depending on the use of the principal property. So that's something that can be considered, but that wasn't part of the discussion during the original bylaw. So I think that there may be room for a separate definition, whether that definition is included in the licensing bylaw, whether the municipality wants to license those as short-term rental accommodations, perhaps they do. And if they do, that's fine. We can probably come up with some sort of a definition. But generally speaking, when you talk about accommodation and dwelling units, they include sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitary.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I think part of the licensing is, you know, all the inspections that come with that, where these retreats don't have none of that. A lot of them, right? So yes, we probably need to, look at a new definition down the road, if that's going to work out that way.
Yes, I would caution though, that not having any inspections for something where you're having people sleeping in and staying isn't probably necessarily the most prudent idea for the
Mhm.
municipality if we're licensing things, because they have to make sure that if the municipality is licensing them, that they're safe.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say was that even under getting the license, these don't apply because they
yeah.
can't. They don't have the facilities, they don't
Yeah.
have water, they don't have a toilet, et cetera, hydro. Okay, Alicia, you had your hand up and then we're gonna move on.
I think that my question was already answered.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's move on to page 4. And
Mr. Chair, I had 1.25. The reason I asked my last question of Jennifer was because we have adopted some
Yeah.
methodology.
Here it is.
So not to, again, not putting you on the
Yep.
spot, but just, it would seem to behoove us
Mhm.
to always use as consistent wording as we can.
Yes,
Just so somebody with a good lawyer can't find loopholes and nitpick between the two, so.
thank you.
Yep.
Good stuff. Anybody else on page 4? Nicole?
Prohibitions down at the bottom, 3.1. No
Okay.
person shall use or operate any short-term rental accommodation within the township unless they hold a current license issued pursuant to this bylaw. The reason we have this committee is to decide how we're moving forward. Are we moving forward with licensing? Or are we going to try and find a different solution? And that's why I thought the committee was formed, so that we could discuss this and come up with a solution that is fair for all short-term rentals.
Mhm.
I sympathize with the neighbors of short-term rentals that are problematic. And we have to find a solution to sort those out. We have to, ASAP, so that neighbors don't suffer. But for those short-term rentals who are operating kindly, gently, and behaving, not having any complaints against them, we also have to find a solution for them. So I think before we say current cannot operate without a license, I think we have to decide how to move forward. Do we go with all licensing, or shall we find a different solution? And we might have ideas here on this panel, on this committee, as we sit here.
Yep, so that's open for discussion here, and some of the bylaws that we got had different pay structures in it. And so I would probably go to Jennifer and
under the framework that we have right now, the municipality is operating under this bylaw. This bylaw is in force and effect. So anybody that's operating a short-term rental that doesn't have a license is in contravention of the bylaw. So that's just the way it is right now. Moving forward, if this committee decides that they're going to recommend that council not proceed with licensing or proceed with different classes of licensing, that doesn't negate the fact that at this point in time, there is a licensing. So the committee doesn't, it's my understanding that the committee doesn't have the mandate at this point in time to say, we can't, we have to get rid of 3.1 because our mandate is to decide whether or not we should have licensing. The fact is that we have licensing right now and it's in place. So the committee could then could recommend to council that we don't believe that classes X, Y, and Z require licensing, But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's council that's gonna have to make the decision. And at this point, this is what we've got.
So do you have any ideas or
Yes.
suggestions?
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's hear them.
So there's two classes of STRs. Those that are occupied by the owner, where you have guests coming and staying within your home, or possibly above a garage, or like mine, which, you know, is on my property, owner occupied. So that is one side. The other side, you have STRs that are non-owner occupied. So full house owner is not in the country or is not in our township. So I think they should be treated differently. So possibly, obviously for the non-owner occupied, go with a licensing fee and in the inspections. And then for owner occupied, maybe a registration. So no license, but a registration. So they are registered with the township. And as we live in our homes, we feel that our homes are safe for us. So maybe not needing all the inspections that a non-occupied STR would need, because if it's safe for us, it's safe for our guests as well. And that would bring the cost down on the township as well. Administration would be less, there would be less paperwork to do, less inspections to come. And also there's no complaints against most of the STRs. Of 51, there are only 5 properties that have had complaints. So then, you know, whatever complaints they have, the bylaw officer would give them a fine, and that fine would pay for the bylaw officer to go out and serve the fines.
Mhm.
So you'd have two, you would have licensing and registration, or, you know, depending on what type of STR you are.
So would there be any inspections?
We don't think it's necessary. If you're living in your home, you're insured. And you know, you have all your, you know, if you want to do a site plan, you want me to draw up a site plan, show you where all my fire extinguishers are, my fire alarms, etc. Also, if I'm working through a platform like Airbnb, that is all my insurance is all covered. So this is where it comes to the affidavit that we sign. And then that takes the onus off of the township. If I, you know, I'm insured, my home is safe.
So Airbnb's inside the existing house? That's what you're talking,
Or on my property.
or on your property?
Mr. Chair. through-
Okay,
Through you, just to let you know for inspections, I believe any building, whether it's a dwelling, a garage,
Mhm.
public building or whatever, are subject to fire code inspections. Regardless whether you're renting them out or not, the fire department could come in and inspect your house
Okay.
just to make sure your smoke alarms and everything is safe. And then, well, if it came to the fact where they find something and it contravenes, and it comes back to other authorities having inspection authorities, just to let you know that there's an inspection stage no matter what for any building.
But if our house has
That's
already,
existing.
yes, so if our house has already been inspected, when we built it and when we have it insured, a new insurance company will come and inspect it and they insure you. So therefore our house has been inspected.
Right, but I think the fire department, because it's an existing building, can come at any time just to make sure it's meets the fire. code
Because
for-
you're renting it out as a short.
No, just any, I'm just
Yes.
making a point that any building can be inspected,
Mhm.
you know, at a certain time. Doesn't have to be during a rental time or a building time or whatever. The fire
But it's
department-
not a necessary thing that everybody goes through.
No, but I
No.
was just making your point,
Yeah.
or trying to make a point to you that, you know, it could be
It
subject to
could be
inspection.
subject to, okay,
Anyways.
so any home,
Correct,
okay, not just STRs.
not just us.
Okay. Yeah.
okay, we're gonna come back. Valerie?
Yes, a couple of points. I think having 2 different owner occupied and non-owner occupied will be difficult keeping tabs on things. we have a lot of different aspects of the bylaw that have to be checked. And we haven't gotten to whether they're, the renewal time for a license or in this case, a registration for owner occupied. I think that it will complicate the situation, number one. And the other question was about inspection. I would say in any area where you are renting out, whether the person is on site or not, there should be inspections to limit township liability.
Okay, and Alicia.
I think that's why it was really important for us to understand what the complaints were, whether they were actually owner occupied or not. And that's a big part of it. I think if the majority of the complaints are non-owner occupied, it shows that the operators that are owner occupied are actually not the issue. It's people that are renting out houses that live in Toronto or live out of country or whatever that aren't paying attention, and they're using it as a full-on income for themselves. The majority of the short-term rentals, I believe, in this township are actually owner occupied. And that's why of the 51, it's only been a 10%. And of that 10%, there was really only 5 units, because there were multiple complaints to the one property. So it really came down to a very small number of complaints that were actually occurring in short-term rentals. So with Daryl's comments about the fire inspection could apply to anybody in the township. It does it whether you're short-term rental or it's just your house. Anybody's house can be inspected for fire inspection. So I don't necessarily think that if you have built a house, you're living in the house or bought a house, you're obviously going to want to make sure that your house is safe for yourself. And if there's some reason that the fire department or the bylaw officer thinks that it's not safe, they're going to come to your house, whether you're short-term rental or whether you're a house that's just your primary residence that you're not renting.
Okay, so
You have 2 people waiting patiently over there.
Steve,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, there's a few things that kind of come to mind with this owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. I do agree. We should address both of those as it stands. I don't mean to move on, but 4.1 says you can only get a license if it is owner occupied. At this where the bylaw is right now. But I also think that we need to look at what it. Maybe we should go back to the principal residence section. But one of the big things about. One of the big items that really made me kind of like realize how important it is to have licensing is contact, figuring out a way to make sure that we can contact somebody if there is a problem. So if it's owner occupied and the person goes down to Florida from, November to March, and there really isn't anybody around, and there's nobody to kind of like, say, hey, there's a big fire in the backyard, when it's way too big, or there's fireworks going off or loud partying. I think the licensing kind of like shores all that stuff up and make sure that if you're having people come stay in your house, that you don't have safety issues. You don't have an electrical panel that's about to catch on fire, or a septic tank that's about to overflow because you have too many people in there, and there's nobody really around as much as they should be, that kind of thing. So
Okay.
I definitely think it should be all included, maybe, and we need to just add more definitions to this and work on, like, for example, item 4.1, which we're going to get to soon, as to the differences between those things.
So I would ask that,
Point of order, please.
okay, go
We're
ahead.
trying to get through this bylaw and we are not sticking to the topic of what we're supposed to be doing. This issue here that we're discussing is not whether we should have a bylaw. We have one. And it's not whether certain people should have to be licensed and others don't. We have to go through this and eventually we will determine what can be done. To try and put that cart before the horse is not going to help us get through this. So point of order, we're not sticking to the topic.
So
Grit, sorry,
hang on,
Mr. Chair.
hang on, Nancy, hang on.
Yeah.
Okay, we've had enough discussion on this part here, but I would like to ask our deputy clerk. At this point, should Nicole be making a motion to have a vote on whether it's registration or whether it's a licensing?
Or shall we do this later on?
Well, I think that the process of going through this is trying to make some changes here as we go. Or keep what we got.
Well, we are taking suggestions at this point and we are writing them down. I think once we condense things, maybe we should go through and make recommendations to council on the changes that we want to see in this bylaw. But at this point in time, we're still at the research phase and we're still trying to determine if this is something that we can do.
Okay, council definitely has the final say.
So we
We
are,
will take what Nicole's
we're
saying as a
making
change.
notes. They're in the meeting minutes and they can be brought forward again as a listing for recommendations if that's what committee so
Okay.
chooses.
Sorry, I just, I wanted to, on the township's website, regarding this ad hoc committee, it actually says that, that the short-term rental ad hoc committee to assist council and staff of the township of Alnwick Haldeman on matters associated with developing a bylaw to address short-term rentals. It does not say that it is to amend the bylaw. As Grit had said, we already have a bylaw. We're not supposed to be, it says that we are supposed to be developing a bylaw. So in the first meeting, we did talk about, you know, whether we were creating a new bylaw or we're amending a bylaw. But all I'm saying is that on the township website, it says that that's the committee. The reason for this committee is to be developing a bylaw to address short-term rental. So I just wanted to bring that up with regards to the comments on the other side of the room.
Okay. I'd like to move on.
I was just gonna say.
Okay.
That we did address this, that I brought this up because I wanted to make this clear at the last meeting of whether or not we were developing a new bylaw or possibly amending the existing bylaw. And I thought it was made clear that we were to provide advice to council with regard to the existing bylaw.
Yes.
I asked that
Yeah.
clarification in the last meetings and that's the clarification that I got. So I think that we were all in agreement that we're not here to develop a whole new bylaw.
Mr. Chair,
And I would concur to that because it would just take weeks to redo everything. I think it's great that we got this one here. We should keep what we like and make changes to the things that aren't working.
Can I make a very quick
Go ahead,
comment about
Steve.
prohibition? I, with the greatest respect to those that see different categories as being worthy of different consideration, and I agree. In any case, that is not inconsistent with saying you have to have a license. The license we could debate when we get to later stages. It could have a lower fee. It could have no fee.
Mhm.
But it allows for registration. It allows for the township to have an understanding of who is doing what. There are tax implications. There are other implications that aren't obvious to us. But I would take great exception to not giving the municipality the power to say, you either have a license or you're not compliant.
Mhm.
What we put into that license condition, that's what we're here to debate. And I look forward to finding those
Okay.
differences.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add, maybe we need to address what is, and maybe change what is on the website, Madam Clerk. Because I look at our mandate and it is a little bit different than maybe what's posted. I don't know what's posted. I haven't got it in front of me. The mandate of the short-term rental ad hoc committee of the Township of Alnwick Haldeman is to provide advice to council on short-term rentals by, and then the rest is there under that. So if we need to look at that and amend it, maybe that's what we should do, but we all pass the terms of reference. So I suggest what you're suggesting and we move on.
Yes.
Mr. Chair? Nancy here. I want to go back to, the bylaw and us enforcing the current bylaws and the issues of the complaints of noise, garbage, fireworks. And there's just, we don't have the resources to enforce these bylaws. And perhaps there's a code of conduct that if we're contacting Airbnb or the marketing sites, that we create and add to a definition, a code of conduct that has to be added to each marketing of each short-term rental, that lists that this is what you have to do, and that you're not only is the owner responsible, but the renter's responsible, including
Okay,
parking.
let's-
So go
let's,
back to Prince Edward County and their parking bylaw, they have to have a
Nancy?
permit.
Nancy, what section are you on? We want to try to.
I was just responding to some of these other comments, and I'm just saying that, you know, we still can't enforce the bylaws that we have that are in place. And I did a lot of phone calls last week, and Prince Edward County has a parking permit that they issue to each owner occupied, you know, cottage or home. And they have permits that are put into their windows. And if you don't have a parking permit in your window, there's like $400 parking tickets that are issued. Same thing with the garbage. I had at our road at Maryland 7th, I had the sign put up that if you dump garbage here, there's a $5,000 fine. There's all kinds of garbage that's being
Okay,
dumped
Nancy.
there, and there's no fines.
We're
So
going to
we're
move on.
talking
Nancy.
about bylaws, but nothing's being enforced.
Okay, thanks. And we're going to move on to page
Okay.
5.
Sure.
Mr. Chair,
Great, let's move on.
she referenced that there's no code of conduct. There's a code of
Yes,
conduct.
there
and
is.
Schedule A attached to this bylaw.
I'm asking that the
Okay.
code of conduct be added to each marketing website so that
Okay, so
people renting
it's
understand.
part of this bylaw and we can deal with that when we get to it. So let's move on to page 5. And let's try to stay focused on, so we're not jumping back and forth and we're not bringing things in that we're not actually talking about when the bylaws up. Because it's just taking too much time and it's just confusing going back and forth. So let's stick to what we're talking about on the pages and let's keep moving forward. So page 5. Does anybody have any issues on page 5? Mr. Gilchrist.
A law that is not enforced is by definition a bad law. So when I look at 3.2, it doesn't seem to make sense to have that sort of clear disclaimer when we aren't pursuing it. Heard suggestions of contacting Airbnb and Verbo directly. And I would be sympathetic to a grace period while that a new bylaw is developed. But I think if this sort of clause is in there, we're wasting our time here today if we're not serious about saying that there is a consequence if you don't follow the rules. So with the greatest respect, I think we've had a year of this bylaw and I don't understand why something as simple as contacting Airbnb and Verbo to tell them license is a requirement. That has not been done. 3.9 brings us to the issue of trailers and that sort of thing. And I think this is the section where, in deference to shepherd's huts and things like that, we're either going to want to add a lot more definition about the difference between owner occupied and whatever. But then when you come to 4.1, it says we only permit owner occupied residences. So I think we need to concentrate an awful lot of effort on reconciling 3.9, 4.1, and what we hear are existing uses to make it very clear that they either fall inside or outside, or we create new categories to make sure that they're equally worthy of the township's oversight.
Okay,
Can I just say
Yep,
something here?
go ahead,
With
Jennifer.
respect to that, 4.1, where it's permitted in a principal, in the owner's principal residence, that is for the new short-term rental accommodations that didn't exist on date of passing of the bylaw in the few zones where they're actually permitted. So if the township decides to expand the scope of where short-term rentals are permitted and permit them in the hamlet residential, the rural residential, the agricultural and the rural zones, then right now, as the licensing bylaw is written, they're only permitted in the owner's principal residence. If the intention is to allow them in either a secondary dwelling unit in an ancillary building on a person's principal residence's property, then that section will need to be expanded. Or if you're going to allow them in a property that is not a person's principal residence, that section will have to be changed. If you're going to allow, say somebody owns a cottage property, that's not the principal property, and you're going to allow them short-term rental accommodation, that section will have to be revised. That is up to this committee to make those types of recommendations.
Okay,
Mr. Chair. I just,
Alicia?
I had one, I know that we're going to work on those, what's going to be permitted and what's not and all of that, but regarding the accessory building, so secondary suites essentially, I think that the province has had a huge mandate on pushing people to be doing these secondary suites, and maybe right now it's to accommodate multi-generational living for their children or whatever that can't get into the market, and to help those types of situations where they have parents or whatever it happens to be. But at some point that may change in their lifetime and they may want to short-term rent it. And at this point, that under 3.9, it said that you cannot operate a short-term rental in an accessory building unit. And I think that needs to be adjusted for sure.
Okay. Good. Okay.
I can change the bylaws based on the recommendations of this committee. But it's going to be up to this committee to come to a consensus as to where short-term rentals are permitted. And once that consensus is made, then we'll go back and revise the documents in a draft form.
Okay. Anything?
Very, very quick point to Jennifer, or actually to the deputy clerk. 3.6 has a typo.
3.6.
The grammar is not correct there.
Okay.
No licensee shall permit, with the addition of tents and trailers shall not be permitted.
Yes.
So.
For you, Chair, I have to leave it this time.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Daryl. Okay, nothing else. We're moving on.
Got some other hands.
Oh, sorry, Jamie.
I liked Deputy Mayor Jones' comment about the map. I would like to see on 3.4 where it says no more than 2 guests per room. On the map, I would like to include how many rooms or how many guests are permitted if we were going to put forth a map for the township. And I would also like to see the businesses in the community also included on that map and available online.
Through you.
Okay.
Through you.
Jennifer?
Chair. I had an opportunity to look at the Tiny Townships map, and basically what it is on their GIS system, they identified short-term rental accommodations with an icon on their GIS. We do not yet have a publicly available GIS system. That is something that we are working on, but we're not there yet. We're working on what's called our cadastral project right now, which is getting our lot lines right. Once we get accurate lot lines, then we'll be able to, my dream, I have a dream. My dream is to have a publicly available GIS system where people can go to our municipal website. They can look up the zoning of their property. They can look up the official plan designation of their property, and they'll be able to see where the short-term rental accommodations are. Right now, we're not quite there yet. We'll be able to produce probably a PDF map that will show the location of the properties, but we're not quite there where we can have a GIS, a publicly available GIS. But hopefully soon. We're working on it.
Okay, moving on. Be okay? Rick?
I think it's important to kind of make a comment regarding secondary dwelling units. And the general intent of that was to increase housing, permanent housing. It wasn't really meant to allow for short-term rentals. That was not the intent. It may be the outcome in some circumstances, but I believe it's really to alleviate housing and to provide affordable housing for adult children and seniors, for example. So I think, again, it's a distinction that's it's one of those grayer areas.
Okay, thanks, Grit. Okay, we're going to move on to page 6. All right. Anybody have any issues?
I have a question if I could. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I should have put my hand up.
Yep.
At 4.1, a license shall be only permitted in the owner's principal residence, and no owner shall rent or advertise a property for short-term rental unless it's the owner's principal residence at that time. That's not what is happening in the marketplace. It's quite the opposite. If I'm reading that correctly. People who are off-site are renting short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you,
Well, I just, I would say to Jennifer, given sorry, our bylaw enforcement officer is gone, but I would have said it to him as well. Given the reality in the marketplace, what should we be doing about 4.1? And I've sort of put a question mark out there. Perhaps someone would like to address it, but we did talk about the difference in terms of registering or licensing those who are owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. And this is right to this question. And I must admit that in my reading of this previously, I jumped right over that. But that is not primarily what's happening in the township. And also it's not primarily where the complaints arise from. So if we could look at that as to how we could address that issue.
I think Jennifer wants to try to address here for you, maybe give you an
Okay.
answer.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Valerie, I think one of the issues that we've got at hand right now are a lot of what we're going to call legal non-compliant short-term rental accommodations that are out there right now.
Yes,
On 6108 Curtis Point Road are not owner occupied. We recognize that. But given that they were in existence prior to the passing of the zoning bylaw that prohibited them, they're considered legal non-conforming. So provided they get a license under the licensing bylaw, they're permitted. What this 4.1 says is that any new ones at this point in time have to be owner occupied, new ones that are permitted under the zoning bylaw. And that's what this committee, I had indicated earlier, has to make a decision on, or a recommendation to council as to whether they are going to recommend that they still be owner's principal residence, owner's principal property, or whether they're going to permit them in any dwelling that's where a single detached dwelling is permitted or whatever. So that's up to this committee to make a recommendation to council.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go
May I
ahead,
ask
Lisa.
a question to Jennifer? Jennifer, where does it stand in the for bed and breakfast in the zoning bylaw? Like, are they permitted as short-term rental? Are they classified as short-term rental? Do they have to register as short-term rental, or how does a bed
No.
and breakfast work?
A bed and breakfast has a separate definition under the township's zoning bylaw, and bed and breakfast, that nothing changed with bed and breakfasts in our zoning bylaw. So a bed and breakfast, they're generally permitted in a number of zones. It's like the rural residential, agricultural, hamlet residential. Most of the zones where you permit I don't think they're permitted in the limited service residential zone, but most of the residential zones, you can have a bed and breakfast, plus the agricultural and the rural zones. And what they allow is the renting of up to 3 guest rooms in a person's dwelling. It's not a separate dwelling unit. It's just a bedroom in your house. It's your typical bed and breakfast experience. It's not a secondary contained dwelling unit where you're renting it out. So anybody right now, provided they're in one of those zones, can have a bed and breakfast, up to 3 rooms, not licensed.
Okay, can I make just one more comment?
Yes,
So
go
I'd like to point out that I know specifically of the 51 packages that have gone out, there are people that receive them that are operating a room out of their house that, potentially are essentially a bread and breakfast that received those packages. So the only reason I mention that is because we keep going on about all these 51, short-term rental operators that are, that aren't following the rules, but some of them, I guess we just need to I'm questioning about, of the 51 packages that were sent out, have they been verified that they're actual short-term rentals, I guess. So maybe
I can answer that. So of the 51, we're not sure if they're bed and breakfast. We're not sure if they're short-term rentals. So we leave it up to the owner of this business home to contact the township. Let us know. There are a lot of people, we've received maybe at least 2 or 3 that have come back to the township to say, oh no, like I live there full time. I don't rent anything out, da, 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 da. So when we get that verification from those people, then sure enough, they're taken off the list. They're no longer considered a short-term rental. So it's also the responsibility of these owners who are receiving these packages to contact us and let us know. We're not going to know otherwise unless they either apply for a license and we find out that way, or because maybe they're not sure. Maybe they think, oh, I have to apply for a license, so they'll fill the information out. That would be great if they did that, but a lot of them aren't. They're not even contacting us to let us know if they are or are not, or even questioning it.
And I, just as a comment to that, I think part of the reason why some aren't is because they know that there is great discussion surrounding this whole issue. And they're waiting to see what is actually going to happen before they start sending in applications for licensing because there have been very public issue, obviously. So I think that's part of the reason why you haven't got that many in yet.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
Thank you. Just going back to what Jennifer said about the residences on 6108 Curtis Point Road all being in existence and operating before the bylaw was passed. That is not the case. Some have come on this summer, some right after the bylaw was passed. So I just didn't want the committee to take my not saying anything to clarify that all of 6108 is not a grandfathered situation.
No, I understand that, Valerie. I apologize.
That's okay. I just wanted the committee to be aware too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. We on page 6? Right?
Yes.
Okay. Insurance. No transfer of license and licensing requirements, an application requirement.
I would note, application requirement, it flips over to the next page, F. F is not specifically cited on the checklist or in the application. There is a notice, the standard legal boilerplate that any information the township collects under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection Act, et cetera, but it does not expressly say that the owner has given permission to the collection of that information. So might I suggest, and I know I'm sort of bouncing ahead here, but under the declaration of applicant, might I suggest that that could be solved by simply adding at the sentence that it says that the applicant expressly consents to the collection of the data.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? Okay, let's move on. Page 7. Continuation and change of information and inspection. Any comments? Nicole?
Inspection, I still, I'm gonna say the same thing I said earlier. Maybe not all STRs will require an inspection. If everybody is subject to an inspection, no matter what. So I think maybe we should question that, look at that a little bit,
Okay,
if they're owner occupied.
okay. Anybody, Alicia?
Is there an opportunity if it's, I don't know, maybe if it's considered, heritage, I'm not trying to single one owner out over, I prefer not to have any inspections if it's a owner occupied. But if it's, happens to fall into a certain number of years old or whatever, where there might be old systems or something that maybe haven't been checked since they, since the house was built or something like that, maybe that's something that needs to, but I think only of the homes that are, within a certain reasonable time frame of being, the year, their age, that again, if you're living in that home, it would be expected that, your smoke detectors up to date and your mechanicals are up to date, those types of things for yourself already.
Okay, good point. Grit.
Just to that, what Nicole said, if, for example, we have 2 bedrooms downstairs, if we decided to rent one of those out and we don't make any changes, I understand your comment, but how does the township know that the STRs that are being advertised now haven't undergone renovations and don't have permits and haven't had inspections to make sure they are safe? So again, there's that I hear what you're saying, I really do. But I have one other thing. We didn't quite get off of page 6 before I got to look at 4.5. It's no person shall fail to remove an advertisement for a short-term rental accommodation that is prohibited under this bylaw within 72 hours of becoming aware of the prohibition or receiving notice to do so by the bylaw enforcement officer. Can I please have that explained? Because I would think that if we're going to go after Airbnb and Vrbo to be taking down advertisements, this one's kind of a little confusing.
Well, this one basically says that if we get a complaint, I'm going to do a hypothetical. If we get a complaint on a short-term rental that they are advertising without a license, and we know now that there are many, and we're going to just put a pin in that right now. And we send them a notice that says you're not in compliance with the short-term rental bylaw. Please remove your listing within 72 hours. So that's what that section says. If they fail to do that, that's when we'll contact Airbnb, BBRO, and try to have the platform remove them from it.
Okay, I see it now.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, moving on. Sorry, Jamie.
Mr. Chair, with two inspections, there shouldn't be a problem unless they're trying to hide something with inspections, is my opinion. And in due respect to the inspections, I'm more concerned about fire and, the type of fire extinguishers you have in your building, and that they're going to be to code should, from experience, should the barbecue and chicken and somebody's down at the dock fishing, or they're out looking, enjoying the nature, that you have the appropriate fire extinguisher and size to put out what type of fire is being had. That, is something I've learned, and I'm sure, not everybody would be understanding as to what they would need. I would say a safety plan would fulfill most of the requirements if one was to provide a safety plan and what is provided and what they have in their short-term rental.
Okay. Okay, gang.
Do you mean a checklist of what is necessary to have
Yeah, there's
as
also
opposed to an inspection?
a safety
Yeah,
plan. Yeah, so a safety plan where your guests would go should something happen.
Yeah.
Who would they contact if you're,
Mhm.
hurt in there, the names of the emergency contacts for the guests that are staying at your place.
Yeah.
Things like that. Where would you find that information should someone come on property?
And most of us have packages in our,
And I think most would,
but that should be mandatory.
correct,
Yeah.
yeah, to make sure that, that everybody's complying and has the pertinent information available for first responders or whoever may be there should something happen.
Okay, gang. Let's move on.
Yes.
Page 8.
What do we got?
A continuance, plus we have insurance and license and grounds for refusal. Doesn't look like much there. Maybe, Jamie?
I was wondering about the public health. So should, once somebody is registered, is that information going to be made aware to public health? Currently, if you are open to the public, that your water and all of those regulations should be up to par. So you would then provide the licensing contact to public health, which would then get in contact to make sure that everything's to standards there. I'm not sure if Jennifer wants to-
Right now, under the way it's written, no, public health would not be contacted because public health is contacted for the commercial tourist establishments, public buildings, all that kind of thing. These are operating, and that's why this is kind of different. These are operating as a residential dwelling, albeit in a semi-commercial capacity. So
I would like to see that.
you would like to see public health notified of the licensed short-term rentals.
Of course.
Okay,
Yeah, my concern is that one would be at a dwelling, you know, and then be out in the community and not sure where that just would pose a risk to other neighboring businesses in the community.
Okay, so what you're saying, it would be like a plus for the short term. Yeah,
They are doing.
or especially for people looking online. Nicole,
So would this be imposed on any business that runs from home, say a massage therapist or a hairdresser or a car mechanic or any business that runs from their home? Would these,
yeah, I think we need to just, yeah, that's another issue. I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure we'll look at that as we go through. I hear you, but for the
Just trying to
purpose of
save
this here, let's
costs
stick to this. I know. Okay. We're gonna,
Since we're looking at this issue from, and Jennifer Curran alluded to it, is that these are technically businesses in residential areas. And the owner may not be there. So, and it may not even be their principal residence. So are these things, what is the taxation level for these properties? And is that something that needs to be looked at?
okay,
this was looked at when we did the original bylaw. These are classed by MPAC as dwellings and they are taxed accordingly. They're not taxed as tourist establishments or other businesses. Thank you.
okay. Moving on, gang. Page 9. So we have terms of condition for licensing and suspension or revocation of license. Everybody looks okay with that page? Okay. We move on to page 10. That's a continuance, and then we have the appeal process.
Mr. Chair, the suspension says the suspension shall not exceed 14 days. In fact, there's an appeal process. What is the likelihood that the township could pursue it in the time frame set out in 11.2? Or
Okay.
sorry, in a way that's consistent with 14 meaning 14. In other words, you say I've done something wrong. I either disagree or I rectify the problem. I inform you immediately. On my 15th day, am I likely to have an answer from the township? Or should 10.2 be amended to say no less than 14 days and up to the time at which any appeal period has been exhausted or something like that?
Probably. Probably it should be amended, where a license is suspended pursuant to the section like this. So you could establish the suspension for a minimum of 14 days. Um, so, yeah, so if you,
I guess my question is what, I mean,
how likely are we going to be able to resolve that within 14 days?
and more to the point, as you know, obviously, if someone goes to court and appeals a piece of legislation, it is considered to be held in abeyance until the
Mhm.
appeal is resolved. So does that mean the suspension is held in abeyance if they appeal it? Or should the suspension continue?
A suspension should continue while it's being, see, the appeal is to council.
Right.
So the bylaw enforcement officer goes out, finds contravention. I think under the terms of this licensing bylaw, the revocation clause would come into effect if there were 3 or more investigated bylaw complaints. And then the bylaw enforcement officer could say, look, we need to revoke this license, and the clerk's office could revoke the license or suspend the license. Then they would have the opportunity to appeal to council saying, look, we didn't really not have fire extinguishers or 40 people here, or whatever the transgression was. And I think that this could probably be looked at to see whether or not it is possible, because you're probably right. The likelihood of it being investigated and dealt with in 14 days is unlikely. So that would be we should have a look at section 10.2 and then 11.2.
Agreed.
Was that C? 11.2?
Yes, 10.2 and
10.2 and 11.2.
Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. Alicia?
So under 10.1, II, and 10.1 II, 3 or more public complaints which are not in the opinion of the license issuer frivolous or vexation in nature have been received. How is that determined? Is it the bylaw officer that determines it's vexatious, or so if you have a neighbor that's doesn't like you, or doesn't like the color of your skin, or doesn't like that you have a jet ski on a lake or something like that, but they're complaining, how do they determine whether it's vexatious or not? Is that left up to the bylaw officer, or how does that?
Under the terms of this, it would be the bylaw enforcement officer that would go out and do an investigation. And if it's determined that it's the same neighbor that's complaining about children playing baseball in the backyard or whatever it is, that the complaint is not it's not that somebody's out there with a campfire that's 15 feet tall in the middle of the night every night. They would do their investigation, see what the complaint was, and if it is a valid complaint, and if there are 3 or more valid complaints, then that would be grounds for suspension.
Right.
But if it was determined by the bylaw enforcement officer that they are indeed vexatious, that they're not legitimate complaints, then they would not go towards a penalty or towards a revocation.
And is there an appeal process in that?
That's what this is, section 11.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, right.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
section 11
Okay.
is.
And I think over time, the bylaw officer will know what ones are the real complaints, and over time, yes. Okay, moving on to page 11. So I'd just like to say that it's like 8:54. Now, do you want to be done at 9, or do you guys feel comfortable to move on a little farther? I'd like to talk about some times and meetings at the end of the meeting, what we can do, but how does everybody feel about 9 o'clock, or do you want to go on for another half hour? Yolanda? We okay for time?
Yeah, it's up to the committee. If you want to continue on till 9:30, that's up to you.
Yeah, like we're halfway through it, so that's,
We only have a couple more pages aside from the forms as scheduled, so.
yeah.
get this done.
Okay,
I agree.
good stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so page 11. So continuance from the appeal and entry and inspection.
I have a question.
Okay, Nicole.
12.1, 12.3, and 12.4. An officer may at any time enter onto a property or premises to determine whether this bylaw is being complied with. 12.3, an officer may enter upon any premises described in a license at any reasonable time. And 12.4, a bylaw, township under this bylaw may be accompanied by any person. So does this mean that the bylaw officer can come onto my property without warning, come anytime or any property, and they can bring any number of people they want or a person? Is that correct?
So I'm not sure what Colleen and Steve's background is, but if they could ever help with some of the law part of this here would be great. To keep it legal, because I mean, this what Nicole is talking about was always one of my concerns. I'm not sure that an OPP can actually come onto your property and knock on your door and walk in. So I don't know that for sure, but Jennifer, if you can shed any light on that.
I will shed what limited light I have on this.
Okay.
Not being a lawyer, but having been around municipal world for quite some time. This has to do with complaints. If somebody was to receive a complaint in the middle of the night or on the weekend about excessive noise, sometimes the people call the police. The police say that's not a police issue, it's a bylaw issue. They call the 800 number. The bylaw enforcement officer then gets a call in the middle of the night and they get to go out and do an inspection. They'll go out to see, first of all, how many people are congregating there. Are they going to burst into your house and count the number of people? Probably not. No, they're going to be looking and seeing if there's a unusually large gathering of people outside. If you have a campfire that's, you know, exceeds whatever it's supposed to be. If you have a fire without a permit, if you're shooting off fireworks in the middle of the night, and that type of thing. That's what those are going for. And we have with us today a very special guest, Rob Gourd, who is one of our bylaw enforcement officers. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Rob. He's also a deputy fire chief and he does fire inspections and he's a bylaw enforcement officer for the municipality. So he does some of these inspections for us where he goes out and he looks when we get the complaint about the bus going down North Shore Road or whatever road it's going down, and he goes out and he does those inspections. So I don't know if you have anything to add to this discussion, Rob. Did I say anything incorrect in what I said? Right.
I only ever respond to complaints.
Rob, excuse me, Rob, you're wrong. Nobody can hear you sitting there. You have to be in front of them.
Sorry, Rob. You can thank
And-
Daryl for this one.
So no, I don't go to anybody's residence. I only respond to complaints. So if we do receive a complaint regarding, say, noise, then I'll respond to that location and I'll investigate it. I will take notes. Depending on the situation, will depend on the outcome of the situation. It's a different situation, I will say, every complaint I get.
It's complaint based. It's not just an inspection.
So, okay, so just to correct Jennifer, it wouldn't be an inspection, it would be an investigation.
An investigation
An inspection is a completely different thing.
from a complaint.
Yes, it's an
Okay.
investigation of that complaint.
Thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, I would, 12.1 is one that I think is a little open-ended, the way it's written. I think we should take a look at it, maybe, like, we're talking about things like if there's a complaint or if there's, if the officer has reasonable suspicion that a violation of safety is being, I think we need to tighten that up a little bit, not leave it so wide open. I don't know if there's like a city attorney or a township attorney or something we could run this by, but I don't know. To me, it looks as if it probably wouldn't be upheld in if a litigation. So if there was an injury and somebody went up, filing a lawsuit or something like that, I think this would probably be looked at as being a little too broad.
Chair,
Okay,
if I may.
yes. go ahead, Rob.
Just if I could explain something, because what was brought up regarding the, a burn in the backyard or a fireworks, so complaints, bylaw complaints, I respond on the complaint basis. But if I'm driving down the road as the deputy fire chief and I notice fireworks and I notice open air burning, those circumstances, I have the power and the right to immediately come onto your property and deal with the situation. I don't have to receive a complaint regarding those two objects because it is in our bylaw through the fire department to deal with that stuff. Just to clarify that.
Right.
So keep in mind, most of the Airbnb complaints regarding that we've received are like noise and just, yeah, exactly what you've been hearing about. Not a lot of them have been in regards to open air burning or fireworks and stuff like that.
Okay,
I have a question because I can't pull it out of my visual head right now. Is there provision within the licensing agreement where it's built in that the people who are applying for the license accept that there will be inspections and that there is that possibility? I know it applies with the medical certificates for cannabis production in a home, where when they take out a certificate, they're agreeing to inspections on their premise. So is that part of our licensing thing? Because I just can't picture it.
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Jennifer.
believe it is, and it's not at the will of the inspectors. It's at a mutually agreed upon time
That makes
where
sense.
they arrange an appointment and say, we'll be out on Tuesday at 2 p.m.
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
conduct our fire and safety.
that makes a lot more
investigation.
sense than what I'm
Yeah.
reading here.
Yeah, that is the purpose of section 12.
Yeah.
Is for bylaw complaints.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Should we be changing that wording then to title, perhaps entry and investigation complaints?
okay. Now. Pauline, I see you thinking.
Yeah.
You want to add to this?
Well, yeah, I think that we have to be careful because we have to make sure that the bylaw officers are not constrained in their ability to enter the premises if not only if there's a complaint, but if there's an emergency or danger or something like that. You don't want like a bad actor, short-term rental person who says, sorry, you can't come in here when something's going on, and have them stand behind that. So I think that you have to be concerned about the fact that the township is licensing and enforcing. So they have to be able to do that. And there can't be too many constraints on them, or else there's going to be all kinds of liability. So I think that we can play around with the language, but I think we have to make sure that the bylaw officers can get into the premises or get access to the premises, if something is going on, because otherwise, they'll just shut down the party or whatever they're going to do and then say, yeah, you can come back tomorrow morning and check it out when everything's nice and quiet. And that's not going to be helpful for satisfying the neighbors who are complaining.
Okay,
I have, Mr. Chair, it's Valerie MacDonald.
yep, go ahead, Valerie.
I just wanted to indicate that, oh, good heavens, I've lost my train of thought. Oh, yes, this bylaw has been vetted by the lawyer. So if he would have thought there was a concern about may at any time, he would have certainly pointed it out. Enter into a property. I mean, he pointed out, several other things that we learned about. So that one is so glaring. I'm sure he didn't, accidentally agree with 12.1. So I would just throw that into the mix as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just have a
Please.
comment to that is that council, even though the solicitor could have made suggestions, it doesn't mean that council went by what the solicitor had suggested. And I know in one of the staff reports, it actually had said that the solicitor advised against prohibiting STRs altogether and to ban them, and council still proceeded to ban STRs. So
Oh, sorry, just
Okay.
a point of clarification on that one. Council did not prohibit short-term rental accommodations in every zone. There are about 2 or 3 zones where short-term rental accommodations are still permitted.
can you clarify where those are?
Yeah, they're the commercial ones.
But no,
Uh,
no owner occupied
No,
residences.
no residential uses.
Right.
But they are permitted in some zones because there would be no land use incompatibilities with the permitted uses.
Okay, gang. Let's move on. Page 12, I guess, eh? You say Steve? Yeah, sorry. Okay, so we have obstruction in order, service of documents. Everybody looks okay with that one? All right. Page 13. Continuation there, so administrative penalties and fines. Looks good? Okay, so page 14, a continuation, we got collection of unpaid fines. Severability schedules, township not liable. Okay. Everybody's good there? Oh. Sorry, I'm missing my pages. So page 15 we are on, which is authorization miscellaneous. Okay. All right, then we're on to Schedule A. Okay, so the guest code of conduct. Purpose of the code, objective of this code, residential area, the guiding principles, maximum number of renters versus guests, noise and residential amenities. Okay. And then page 17. Access and parking, recycling and garbage, dwellings on lots and private sewage disposal systems, fire and occupant safety, additional responsibilities of the owner or host.
Mr. Chair, regarding parking, and I brought up in my last comment about Prince Edward County having a $400 parking ticket if you didn't have a permit. Again, the issues of enforcing the bylaws and people, you know, because I have parking spots being dug on my property, but I'm sure it's happening everywhere. Is there something that we can do to enforce the parking bylaw and make it more aggressive.
The next schedule B is the fines. So that might help you at least with the dollar
Right.
value.
Because, you know,
But let me just say, I know because everybody's talking about enforcement, lady, but let me say that this council is 100% on side of enforcement for this bylaw, in bylaws in general in this township. So we can't change, we can't be responsible for the past, but we can change what's going on. So be assured that this council is well aware, and we are putting our best foot forward to make sure that the bylaws are being enforced. Joan?
To you, Mr. Chair, to you, Rob, I'm just looking at page 17 of this. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but when you are going to some of the homes and on a noise complaint, do you ever ask to see the certificate or the application license, like the code of conduct? Do you ever go to see, when you go there, see that?
These packages weren't sent out. I don't, Yolanda, was that late? So.
Yeah.
The packages were sent out about September, October, or something
so
like
a lot
that.
of the complaints, these packages weren't even in anybody's hand
Right.
for me to ask.
And the licensed owners would have copies of these
Right.
posted to their guests or given to their guests. So if nobody's licensed, then these are not posted.
No, you gotta realize the people that are running this place, these places have no clue
Of the code of
of
conduct.
any of this.
So back to that code of conduct and Airbnb and your listing, there's all kinds of, you know, different areas that could be posted, and it could be posted inside your cottage rental or your short-term rental. And like, it has to be something, there has to be communication between the person who's renting the place and whoever's making the money. So there's got to be a code of conduct that's posted somewhere. And maybe if we contact Airbnb and Verbo and all that kind of stuff, we request that, you know, that's part of our bylaw and our policy, that the code of conduct is posted on each marketing site. Because
Okay.
again, you know, we've got the fireworks and we've got the garbage dumping
Yeah.
and we've got the parking issues that aren't being dealt with. And if it's a code of conduct that somebody's renting and that Airbnb's insurance is covering as much as a cottage or, you know, a rental should have additional insurance, there's got to be something posted inside each facility that they're renting.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Okay, so schedule will be here for the fine fees. What do we, Alicia?
Sorry, no, I was just gonna make a comment about, again, that it's important to determine between owner occupied and non-owner occupied. If you're living in the residence, chances are you're not gonna have noise complaints, because if they're disturbing your neighbors, they're disturbing you. So I'm just pressing on that point again, when we're going through the licensing of this, that, you know, we need to take careful consideration about when they're owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. So just a comment.
Excuse me. So I want to throw a couple of things out there just for the set fines. You know, should there be a tiered set of fines? Your first offense, your second offense, your third offense. Are the fines enough? You know, it seems in my life, it seems like, you know, when these are being enforced, that's what makes people understand what the rules are. So go ahead, Colleen.
I agree. I think that unless the penalties for not complying with things are substantive, then they're going to be ignored. I know that in my area, the Airbnbs are averaging about $1,000 a night. So $400 for not operating without a license is not going to be a big hit unless the bylaw officer is going there every single time that they have somebody there. So I think that perhaps some of the reluctance of people to file or apply for their license is that there aren't any repercussions. They're just going to carry on business, and if they get slapped with $500 fine, well, that's just the cost of doing business.
Okay, who was next? I'm gonna go over here to Nicole.
So the purpose of this committee, again, is to amend this bylaw. So until the bylaw has been amended, it's very difficult to go forward and purchase your license and comply with that part of, it might change.
Yep.
Yep.
Noted. Steve,
Yeah, I was gonna say, you mentioned the tiered fine system. I would agree with that. I think especially since this is a new law, this is a new bylaw, and I do believe there are a lot of people out there that don't even know it exists, and I'm sure of that. We should start off with maybe like a warning and go up, but I do think the fines, especially the number one is low. I do agree with that. I think but maybe the first time should be a warning, and then, you know, the second time it's $500, the third time is, you know, $1,500 or something like that. So some sort of a where it goes up kind of exponentially, not necessarily flat.
okay, anybody calling? Sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that these items for which they would be receiving fines would be considered, if the bylaw enforcement officer is setting a fine or giving somebody a fine, that under the terms of the license agreement, that would have been an investigated contravention of the bylaw, and that would go towards one of the three penalties. So if they were to get three contraventions and 3 fines, then that's grounds for revocation of their license. So that's just something that can be considered when you're talking about fine levels and tiering fines. Because if you're tiering it first, second, third, by the time they get their third offense, their license should probably be revoked.
Agreed. All good stuff. Steve,
I would support a tiered approach with the second fine doubling and the third fine quadrupling. And in concert with, as Jennifer's just pointed out, the fact that your third strike is probably going to have even bigger consequences. At that point, the economic argument has been removed. The first one serves as the warning. It's still a significant number, even if it's less than what they're charging per night. The second is going to be more serious by the time it quadruples your third offense. Nobody's charging that much per night.
yep. Great.
Can Airbnb be held accountable to ensure that anyone from that's advertising an STR in our municipality has to notify the person that there is a bylaw in place? Or do they require that of people who put in advertisements? Because then these people should already have been looking at the municipal bylaws to see what's in effect.
That might
What's
be.
the liability for Airbnb on this?
I would say that Airbnb is not gonna care whether we have a bylaw or anything like that in place, or.
So then we have to ask them to pull it.
You know, town to see, you know, who has a bylaw. And my concern was reaching out to Airbnb for the current short-term rentals. Would they be individualized? Because the ones that are, you know, running, and for the commercials that are commercials, resorts and tourism within Alderman would affect them. If you would say, you know, it would have to be a basis, you know, per property, which now you're talking time, money, and resources on taxpayers' dollars within Alderman.
Alicia?
I think the whole reason really that this whole issue has come up is because there are bad short-term rental operators out there. You know, there's lots of good ones, and I think we should be working with the ones that are good and providing tourism and accommodation, because we don't have any, hotels and things for people to stay at for emergency over Christmas, the whole where everyone was staying at the last and ladle, the contractors and things like that. So I think that if the whole thing is that we want to stop the bad apples, that's the biggest thing, I think, why we need to have this bylaw in force in the first place. So if that's what the actual issue is 10% of the STRs that are a problem, then the fine should be, as Stephen had said, is that let's do it, minimal, then double, then triple, and then the last is that you don't have a license. That's hopefully going to, take away the bad apples. That's what the whole reason we want to have here is, so that we don't have those people, and let's have the good ones operate. Let's not penalize them. Let's let them operate, but let's make sure that we're looking after the ones that are actually bad.
Okay.
Just
Steve?
one thing real quick, and also in here, it says that these, the three, magic number 3, it resets after, I think it was 12 months or something like that. So, that's something we got to, it is possible to have more than just 3 offenses. Because it does reset after a certain, I think it's 12 months. I think it was.
You should fix that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd
Jane.
also like to state, so there could be people within the community that has more than one short-term rental. So if they're having, say they've got a fine for one of them, does it pertain to the other one as well, or just the certain? Just one that they're operating? If they have multiple licenses under their name, how is that going to play effect with?
Under
Yeah.
the terms of the license agreement, as I understand it, the penalties and fines are associated with that one particular property, not per operator.
Not perhaps. I didn't see this.
So the rest of these, he'd be okay in the rest of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so the other thing too, maybe, I know it's not fine related, but something to look at is the licensing fee, is because the licensing fee is 750 and the fine is 500 if you don't get the license. So that needs to be looked at. Rick,
Yeah, I'd like to make a recommendation that be up to $1,000 for operating an STR without a license. So this is for new STRs going forward, that everyone complies and come to the point where we have a consensus, because there should be no reason that they should be operating.
What about failure to not have enough parking, parking for your rental or garbage disposal? It's not here for the fines.
There's the parking one, which is under Part 2, Provincial Offences Act. Failure to park a vehicle on a hard surface driveway, $350. That's right underneath failure to comply, like all the list of short form wording.
okay,
Mhm.
The Provincial Offences Act.
Why am I not seeing this?
It's page 18, just about to the bottom. Part 2, Provincial Offences Act is bold.
I got
And-
it. Okay, it's on the very bottom, right?
Yes.
okay. So any more questions on these fines? So it is about 9:23. The next thing would be the application license. I tell you, we're moving right along here. Good stuff, you guys. Good stuff. So is the application part of it an issue with anybody?
Forgive me, Chair, there was one, and I don't mean to go back to Schedule A. I think perhaps there should be a Schedule D. We have mentioned in a number of places that it's appropriate for the license applicant to sign the guest code of conduct and then post something. The something isn't defined. Presumably it's every clause, but we don't have a template. And might I suggest that to avoid any confusion or any wiggle room, there be a Schedule D, or whatever schedule it winds up in the new bylaw that says this is what you post. We're not going to leave it up to you to reimagine. It will have all the same terms and conditions, but we'll have wording that we don't let anyone change.
And what was that again, Steve, where you were?
So in Schedule A, the licensed applicant signs
Gotcha,
that there
okay.
will be best code of conduct. And earlier in the bylaw, we say that they then must post that, but we don't describe the form and content of the actual guest code of conduct. And I would suggest that something that it could very well be identical to Schedule A, but it's signed by the guest, or it's the notices to the guest. But the way it's written right now, we've got the applicant promising, I'll do something, but the form and the content of the something is not expressly laid out.
Okay.
Maybe I'm being too.
Mr. Chair, under the application for license, under owner information, does our bylaw anywhere address when it says owner occupied, whether that's an individual versus a corporation or partnership? And the reason I raise this is because I have been told by bylaw enforcement that tracking down a corporation and then getting a responsible individual to respond is very difficult. So the first question is, does it have to be an individual? And the second is, then how do you make contact and get response?
Okay. Anybody else? Steve?
Just very quickly, under D, purpose of application, we've talked at length about needing to distinguish between owner occupied or other. It would seem appropriate that that's where, if in fact the bylaw is amended to provide for other, as opposed to the way it's worded right now, might I suggest that D, a box would be put in there that says non-owner occupied, that they're applying for something where the owner will not be present. There'll be lots of other changes we have to make, but we certainly have to make that on the actual application.
Yes, I think that really, until the terms of everything else in this agreement have been narrowed down, deciding how to change a form is kind of the last minute, something that comes after the details of the licensing bylaw come into effect. Once you decide exactly what you want contained in the licensing bylaw, then we can work on the form. The form's kind of the easy part after all of the difficult stuff has been decided before.
Just don't want to miss it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
Okay,
makes sense.
Grit has a question.
A question to that through you,
go ahead, Grit.
Mr. Chair. At the end of the Schedule A short-term rental accommodation guest code of conduct, it says, I, having read the above and the terms of short-term rental accommodations bylaw and license, undertake to provide those persons renting my short-term rental accommodation with a copy of the guest code of conduct and advise them to act appropriately. Okay, that's great that they're signing that, but does it appear in the bylaw itself or in the licensing agreement that we require, following what Mr. Gilchrist was suggesting, that there be a requirement that these codes of conduct, et cetera, are posted within the premises, and proof of fire inspection and proof of whatnot, so that even the renters that are there feel like they are being protected as well?
Good point.
Chair, through you to Grit, it's covered in definition 111. So it is mentioned earlier in the bylaw.
Well, good.
Okay, we're gonna move on. Yeah, go ahead,
Forgive me, it's also under 9.0 terms and
Yeah.
condition of license. Yes, a copy of the guest code of conduct posted prominently.
Which section? 9?
9.0, yeah.
Yeah, that's where they have the current license, the noise bylaw, the package of information that guests are required to.
But I believe that that should be sent to the guests in advance or posted on any marketing sites. For someone to come up and they just show up and that they're not going to maybe read it. It should be sent in advance and it should be part of the code of conduct that it, or, you know, for the permit. That's, you know, something that has to be sent or posted or marketed. Otherwise, somebody might miss that. They might say, oh, we weren't made aware that there was a fireworks or a noise bylaw or something like that. And then what do you do when we have issues or we've got, you know, long-term full-time people living up on the lake and, you know, they're having issues with all these rentals.
Okay, let's move on to almost the last page before we get to the checklist. So declaration of application. And the affidavit of the owner occupied. Nothing there.
Aside from the earlier comment they made about, we need a line under the declaration that they are granting express approval to the collection of data.
Okay. Okay. And then the back of it. I guess it's just for office use there only. You don't need to worry about that. Declaration by the bylaw enforcement inspector? No? Okay. Okay, it's 9:31. So we have the checklist left. So do we want to do that for another meeting?
Well, Chair, to the extent that the checklist matches exactly section, good grief, we've already passed it. The terms and conditions of the license. Where are we? No, licensing requirements 7.0. We've already gone through and offered our comments, and the checklist is nothing more than a chart. It covers everything that's under 7.1.
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
except for the fact that we haven't determined the actual licensing fee, right? So the first item, I think, is
Yeah.
going to spark a lot of discussion about what the actual fee is.
Sure.
And
Perhaps.
whether we do owner occupied.
No, no, but yeah, that's what I mean.
Owner occupied, if we separate two.
Okay, so do we want to debate the licensing fee, or do we want to just throw some numbers out there and come back with something?
Can I make a
Yep,
suggestion?
go ahead.
Given the time that we have right now, and there are a number of issues that have been identified by the committee in the bylaw that they would like to have addressed or make a decision on at a future meeting. So we've got this licensing bylaw now, and at the next meeting, they want to discuss the zoning bylaw, which is where short-term rentals would be permitted.
Okay.
If staff were to take this back now, based on the conversations that had taken place, and make an amended copy with the options for the areas that require direction from the committee that have been identified, for you to make decisions on that at not the next meeting, but the prior meeting. Next meeting, you could discuss where you want to have short-term rental accommodations and whether you want to have them in secondary in accessory buildings or not accessory buildings and yurts and all that kind of stuff. You can discuss that at the next one. And then at the following meeting, staff could bring back, we would have time to bring back an amended bylaw with options for the committee to make decisions on. That's just a suggestion based on some experience in dealing with this type of thing.
No, that's that's a great suggestion. Grit?
Further to that, planning report that was brought before council on February 24th this year actually describes how the $750 fee was arrived at. And that's also where it's brought forward by the solicitor that they cannot make punitive damages against someone that's not on site versus someone that's on site because the licensing fee is not punished. It was, the actual wording was during the legal review, the municipal solicitor commented that license fees are intended to cover the costs of the licensing program and enforcement. They cannot be punitive or tied to profit. As such, the license fees for both private and secondary residents should probably be the same.
Probably.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mr.
Room
Chair,
for discussion there, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're heading.
I would
in the
say,
right place.
yeah, I would suggest that, I like Jennifer's idea. And if everybody's okay with that,
Mr. Chair,
yes?
Um, uh,
Sorry, Valerie.
just as the license fee is up for a lot of discussion, I would think that on that checklist, the very last one about grandfathering is also very much open for significant discussion. And I would like to have that discussion at another time, not now, as I know you still want to set up the next meeting. And there's my request to include my report and good aspects to consider from the comparisons of other bylaws, as well as the grandfathering that's dealt with in the last part of the checklist that starts if the facility was in existence prior to May 19 of 2022.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Deputy Clerk, do we need a motion to accept Jennifer's idea? Or can we just?
No, I don't think you need a motion, but under the item for the new business, or what was it again?
Could we use that for new business?
Well, and that's the thing. So new business for future discussion. I think maybe if we list in there what you would like to see on the next agenda, then we can start preparing the information to prepare the agenda. And even the following agenda, if you want to just list ideas about things you want to see coming forward.
Okay,
No motion is required, though.
excuse me.
Yeah.
So so Jennifer's idea, let's bring back the zoning bylaw for the next meeting, right?
Yeah, discuss where.
'Cause that's gonna-
short-term rentals
yeah.
should be permitted.
And then that'll give us 2 weeks to change the existing bylaw with all the other notations that we want to put in it. And
Mr. Chairman, I would again reiterate that we need to have discussions as it relates to the license application fee, as well as the grandfathering requirements as listed here. And as I say, I did provide a report that committee members can get a copy of, and I would ask that to be part of next week's agenda as well, please.
yeah, so if anybody needs anything on the agenda, it needs to be in by Yolanda, if we're gonna go for,
It
if we're
depends
gonna go
on
next
when
week.
you want to plan the next meeting.
Yeah, so do we want to keep going a week? And I have a couple suggestions that Yolanda and Joan and I have been throwing around. So if we go every week, can we start at 6 and go till 9? That'll give us 3 hours a meeting. Or do we go every other meeting? Or sorry, every other week? A couple things would be every week is a little tight to get things done, but Yolanda thinks that we can handle it. It's getting information back from you guys by, like, say, Friday would be the latest that Yolanda could get it and get it on the agenda and get it back out to you. Joan?
I just through you, Mr. Chair, what we discuss here still has to go to council.
Mhm.
And we are all aware that this bylaw has to be in place ASAP. So it's going to mean doing lots of homework And that's kind of the nature of what, what we're looking at here, because even if we finish this at the, maybe the first week of April, hopefully we're done by then, it still has to go through council and there's still work. And we really have to get this in place for, maybe you could help me, Jennifer, the turnaround for this. If
There's two separate items that we're talking about here. It's gonna be easier to change your licensing bylaw than your zoning bylaw. Under the township, under the planning act, there's a prescribed procedure for doing a zoning bylaw amendment. It requires public notice and public circulation. Now, given that it's a blanket wide municipal bylaw, that means notification in newspapers. We actually have to put them in printed newspapers, of which we have the Northumberland News and the Community Press. In order to make the press deadlines for that, usually it's a week prior to that. So you need a 20-day notice period. You're talking probably a minimum of a month to get out the notice for a zoning bylaw amendment. So once you make a decision on, well, you make a decision, you make a recommendation, goes to council. Council makes a decision that they want to proceed with the zoning bylaw amendment, then we have to put in place the process. And the process will be the notification and the public meeting. So there will be a public meeting at usually the municipal council meeting. So really, we are now in early to mid-March. Realistically, council's probably not going to make a direction to staff to proceed with the zoning bylaw amendment until probably middle of April, the way things are going here. Which means that a zoning bylaw amendment probably won't, realistically, probably end of May before a zoning bylaw amendment's passed.
So Jennifer, how many of the short terms would that affect? If
Well,
we're
it
just
doesn't-
kind of,
it doesn't
we're just kind of
affect-
looking out there.
It
But
doesn't
all I'm
affect-
saying is that I don't, we can still,
Yep.
most of the people can move along and get their thing done with the licensing
It only affects
and all
new
those.
ones.
Perfect.
It only affects new ones.
Yep.
The existing ones can proceed, the council can change the licensing bylaw however they choose fit. And we can proceed with licensing all the existing ones, that's
Yep.
fine. The zoning bylaw amendment, will it impact any new zone, any new short-term rentals
That's
that
fine.
weren't in existence prior
Yep.
to March 19th, 2022?
Okay, just one sec, Brett. Valerie, do you have your hand up or did you just not take it down?
Oh, no, I didn't. I would only just reiterate the issues that I raised on the checklist. And when we're
Okay.
going to discuss those two things, as well as the presentation that I provided before this council session, but after the deadline, to see that it's going to be involved in part of our next meeting's agenda.
Okay, thank you. Grit?
My concern at this point in time is that we have a license, we have a licensing bylaw in place. And yes, we're going to be making recommendations to councils, but we cannot stop proceeding on the STRs that we know of. We need to proceed as far as our township is concerned to get those premises licensed. Now, a suggestion could be that if we amend the fee, the registration fee or the licensing fee at some point, that they will be reimbursed for the difference. But at this point in time, I really think we have to start being proactive and get the licensing process going and the bylaw enforcement happening.
Mr. Chair.
Yep. Go ahead, Lisa.
Or, given that there are a number of changes that we are trying to amend in this bylaw, maybe a moratorium is put forth until we get the new one put together.
Not sure what the legal part of that is,
And
if we do that, but as far as the township goes, but let's come back with an answer at our next meeting.
I
Okay,
just want to.
go ahead, Colleen.
I just want to repeat that the township has to take serious concern about the fact that they have a bylaw that's not being enforced. And I know people think things are going to get changed and they're going to wait for that to happen, but that doesn't mean that you can be non-compliant with the current existing law. And I think that the township is going to put itself in a legally fragile situation if they don't take this seriously. There's a bylaw that's in effect and it needs to be dealt with. There can be changes at some point, but until those changes are made, the bylaw that is in effect stands.
Thank you.
And I'd
Okay.
agree with that as well.
Yes, I would certainly agree.
Okay, so
Sorry.
listen, we got new business, we got figured out, Yolanda.
Next meeting.
Okay, so what I have listed here for future discussion is on the next agenda, bring back discussions with the zoning bylaw and where short-term rentals want to be or where we want them located or how we want that situated. Are we also going to bring forward Valerie's information that she's provided us to put that on the agenda for the public to see as well?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And is this the time that we add the like the utes and the other short-term rentals that people have that are the nature ones? If we're going to adapt them in the zoning bylaw, is that,
It could be under zoning. It could be part of that discussion.
so we probably should have
Yeah,
that discussion.
yeah, that'll be part of that discussion. I'll
Okay.
put that on there.
Okay.
And now for the next meeting, though, I'm just not sure where you're gonna go, whether it's gonna be next week or because of the March break, we're gonna put it
Okay.
off another week.
Does the March break affect anybody here tonight?
I'm more concerned about Jennifer saying she'd be away,
Right.
basically most,
Yeah.
likely just.
You're away when, Jen?
She needs 3 days to be here for the whale.
So you're away Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
I'm away Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and I'm
Okay.
hopefully back Wednesday, but Wednesday is tentative.
Jamie just said she's off.
Jamie,
I'm away next week.
can you Zoom?
Ideally would not like to while I'm
Yep.
dealing with my kids, but if I need to, I will be here for it.
Okay,
I
um,
wouldn't want it to be from.
Yolanda, time frame for you?
I mean, if you want to have one next week, we can. If you want to choose to have it at 6 PM, that's fine as well, as long as committee is all in agreement.
Okay, is everybody okay with dropping it back to 6 o'clock till 9?
Yes, but I'd like to
Next week.
see us not have a meeting next week due to March break.
So long as the meeting
I'm-
doesn't go to 9:30. Obviously, we're even past the half hour now.
Yeah, I know. So, okay,
We also, we
Let's-
would like.
let's
to
take
get
a break
this
next
wrapped up
week.
Quickly as well.
let's
so
take a break next week and we'll put it into, what would that put us into? Deputy Clerk,
22nd.
got a calendar
22nd is my grandson's
That's
birthday.
22nd, so that would be
at
March
6 o'clock?
22nd. So next meeting will be March 22nd at 6 PM.
Okay. Everybody's good? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second, Steve? Steve and Steve.
Was it Lawson that moved it or?
I
Steve Gilchrist moved it.
Awesome second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everybody. That was a great meeting.
Your trip?
This I'm assuming is yours. You might keep a copy.
No,
Keep that.
take it.
Here.
No, I got this
You
one.
want this one?
No, you wrote in that one. Didn't you?
Oh, yeah. I
Very
did.
good meeting.